In the 1960s, the brewing frustrations of many Americans began boiling over. U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War sparked anti-war protests. The women's movement built in intensity, and the African American civil rights movement exploded. The African American civil rights movement sought to end discrimination. It called for equal access to public facilities, employment, education, and housing, as well as the right to vote. While the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited race and sex discrimination in employment, it took a long time for the practice to become a reality.
Some of the barriers faced by Black women here in Las Vegas had to do with just the regular practices in place because of racial discrimination.
Schools were segregated. Among other things, communities were segregated. We had the famous West Side community that hardly had any of the amenities that you would find in any other community in Las Vegas.
We see photographs sometimes of that West Side community, and we see those photographs of tents and shacks. Well, that's the way Blacks lived.
Area jobs were limited by both race and sex.
My mother was an educated person. She came here from Mississippi with a degree in education from Alabama State at Montgomery. However, when she arrived here, the positions that she could get was daycare, maid work, washing and ironing.
But there were some women who managed to create their own businesses. One of these women, Sarah Ann Knight Preddy, is our next maker. During her career, Knight Preddy distinguished herself as a civil rights activist and entrepreneur.
She was the first Black woman to have a gaming license in the state of Nevada.
Born and raised in Oklahoma, Sarah Ann Knight Preddy followed her family to Las Vegas in the early 1940s. In need of a job, Knight Preddy found herself working in West Side clubs.
Sarah Ann learned to deal in some of those small nightclubs, casinos over on the West Side.
Preddy and her husband eventually moved to Hawthorne, Nevada, where she owned and operated a club. A few years later, she returned to Las Vegas's West Side and ran clubs there. Preddy's family also invested in reopening and preserving Las Vegas's first interracial casino, the Moulin Rouge Hotel Casino. In 1971, she worked with the NAACP to establish the Consent Decree. While the Consent Decree was a huge step forward, it certainly wasn't a cure-all.
NAACP really pulled it off, but they didn't follow through like they should have. They followed through a lot, but not with the poor women. We took it and pushed it through with the poor working welfare mother and the poor working families.
Ruby Duncan has dedicated her life to helping those in need. Duncan came to Las Vegas in 1952. She found work first as a maid and then as a cook. But after an accident, she lost her job and needed welfare assistance.
And welfare rights was always talking about full-time jobs, full-time work. If you make it possible that the country becomes employable full-time, then there's no need for welfare.
In 1972, when the state of Nevada cut 75% of welfare aid to mothers, Duncan was moved to act. She began organizing demonstrations and marches. That same year, Ruby Duncan, with the support of community leaders, founded a community-run anti-poverty organization called Operation Life. Operation Life sought to provide full services to the impoverished of West Las Vegas. Despite all of the barriers related to racism, segregation, and inequality, women like Ruby Duncan and Sarah Ann Knight Preddy sought to bring positive social change into Nevada's communities. Our next maker did the same through her work in education, community service, and leadership.
Delia Dondero is a great example of a woman who was simply volunteering her time for her children and her family. She got her start working in the PTA. She loves to say that Maud Frazier encouraged her to move up in that organization and become a chair.
Dondero's desire to serve her community continued to grow. In addition to her involvement with various organizations, she eventually made a run for public office. In 1974, she was elected Clark County's first female commissioner, and the male commissioners suddenly had to adjust to working with a woman as their equal. One of her first days on the job, there was some confusion regarding her role at a commission meeting.
I was knocking on doors, and finally Tom Wiesner opened the door to one of the doors, and he says, "Oh, come on in." I had my little pencil and pad, and he says, "We'd like a cup of coffee, and you can take some notes." And I looked at him and I said, "You know what? I've got the same vote you have. You may need it someday. Take your own notes. Get your own coffee." So that was our beginning.
Dondero worked on flood control projects, improving the county hospital, and expansion of the McCarran Airport.